All right. Well, hello and welcome everybody on the call today. Thank you for being here. My name is Marina and I'll be your host on behalf of NuRelm. This webinar is about building software to support your next research study, and you're in for a treat because it's a fan favorite in our Technology for Human Behavior and Intervention research series. If you're thinking about doing work that will require a web or mobile app to deliver an intervention, gather data, or anything else, this webinar is for you. So we are recording it and it will be available on our website. An email will be sent out tomorrow for everybody who attended with the link to the recording. We do encourage you to put questions in the Q&A section for our speaker to answer later on in the webinar. And our speaker is Sam Shaaban, co-founder and CEO of NuRelm. If you don't know him, he's a great guy to get connected with, really knows his way around the industry. So with that intro, I'll turn it over to Sam.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is a first webinar that we put together based on a white paper that we wrote a couple of years ago in our Technology for Human Behavior and Intervention research series. We're hoping to share some of the overview things that we've learned over the years doing this sort of work. And it seems like this webinar is a good overview, and a lot of people have the same questions as they think about building some sort of technology, a web app, a data pipeline, whatever, for their study. So hopefully I'll give you a good overview of all the important things to think about, but we're definitely happy to sit down and do a more thorough discovery. Maybe one of the things that we'll send out could be a Calendly link to schedule a time to brainstorm as well, if anybody has anything they'd like to kind of dig deeper into. So as Marina said, I'm the CEO of NuRelm, and we have been around for over 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and we have gotten really good at developing software for academic research projects for folks like the people who are probably watching this. We do some work with for-profits and nonprofits, but really the majority of our work is in this research area. And, I think that, we're located in Pittsburgh. Most of our employees are. But I really think that the greatest skill that we've developed over this quarter of a century is finding and keeping amazing people around. I was looking recently at our kind of tenure of folks here, and even if you don't include me and my co-founder Mona, who have been around the whole time, people have stuck with NuRelm for over 6 years. So it's a really great crew. We really know this world well. We have a lot of really cool and fun clients. I think the other part is attracting and keeping really awesome clients as well. And I'll tell you about some of those clients as we go. So I'm thinking that you love what you do. You're a researcher and a scientist, but you didn't want to be a software engineer and you haven't changed your mind and you want to do what you do. And you probably would just like to have somebody that you trust that you can brainstorm with, or if you come to the point that you're going to build a project, have them build it, have somebody that's going to help you. But really, I think you just need a partner that you can work with that can sort of help you think through ideas. But before you even have that, you need to have a nice framework for how to do that. And I'll provide you with that in this presentation. Presentation is not technical. If you want to get into any technical details, of course, ask questions at the end, but always feel free to give us a shout and we'll talk through things. I'll show you a bunch of examples of work that we've done, because I think just me sort of talking without things to help kind of pin the things that I'm talking about to a reality that may seem familiar to you wouldn't be as useful. So I think that'll help out a bunch. So just real quick, we work with a lot of universities. This is a sampling of them on the screen, but we do a lot of work with folks here in Pittsburgh, but we've slowly over the years branched out and work with a lot of great customers across the country. So quick disclaimer, we are a for-profit company. We do the kind of work that's described here, often as a vendor for folks like you or other organizations. Sometimes we lead SBIR and STTR grants as a partner. And we've started exploring licensing IP from universities. So we do a lot of the work here. I don't want to imply that we're by far the only company that can do this. We're really good at it, but I'm not trying to tell you that we're the only option for any of the things that we'll describe doing. We fit in this market. We're probably smaller than most companies capable of doing this kind of work. We have about 14 employees, which include all the ingredients needed to focus on some really big projects. And we're really focused on the academic market. It's probably about 70% of what we do. As I mentioned before, this presentation is based on a white paper, which we'll be happy to share with you, that's got a lot more detail on this topic. We produced it a couple of years ago, and this presentation is based on that. So be happy to share that. All right, so what are we going to try to answer today? I would like to give you a really good big picture overview of how to think about developing a software tool for your project. I'd like to help you think about why you might build these tools, why you might build such apps, and then, of course, how to plan for it. I think sometimes planning is a little bit underrated, or maybe not underrated, but it's easy to underestimate how much work should go into planning. It really is just as important as the building phase. So we'll talk a bunch about that. We'll talk about the building phase, but I'll really try to summarize down the one slide anything that's sort of the technical nuts and bolts. Those are things you can talk about later. I think those are things that you can think about. You can find a lot of other resources on as well. So I won't put you to sleep with any talk about programming languages or anything like that. Feel free to shout if you want to talk about those things. I'd love to talk about it. And then we'll talk about what to do once you build this thing. So that's another thing that sometimes is underestimated in terms of how much bandwidth one should put into thinking about that. And then we'll have Q&A. I think we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm a pretty quick slide goer througher. So, all right, why would you build a research app? I'll tell you some good reasons that we think a lot about. All right, so the first kind of category that I think about is making something easier. That translates into reducing costs or reducing headaches on your research team's part. So, one way to think about that is to just do something in a way that's much less cumbersome. So, EMAs, instead of a phone call or a web-based survey. So, prompting somebody on their phone via an app to sample how they feel or what they're doing or whatever is much, much more efficient than having somebody call them. But in other cases, we make things not only easy, but possible. So I'll give some examples in a bit of projects where we built a tool that collected passive sensor data from a phone to build some sort of continuous measure of hyperactivity or depression or movement, of some sort, mood of some sort. So making something easy or even just possible is one, I think, broad category of why. Making your reach further, being able to reach out further and lower costs is a really big deal. Moving part of a successful in-person intervention to a mobile app lets you reach way more people if you can figure out how to do it well, which we can help you with, or a good partner can help you with. That typically makes it a lot easier to deliver. And if you do it right, you can put a human in the loop in the right place. So it shouldn't always mean extracting all the humans out of the work. I think the best projects include people, but get rid of all the kind of manual labor that isn't a good use of a really smart person's time. And then finally, making a task efficient. So, the example here, and I'll show you an example in a second of a project that does just this, is moving a safety planning process from pen and paper to an app. So here is an example of a project just like that. So this is an app that's had quite a long life now. I think it's probably been around for 7 years. It's called BrightPath. And we've been working with researchers at the University of Pittsburgh and the Department of Psychiatry. This group is called Etudes. It's a big center grant that I think was recently renewed. And really, it's a mobile app that was built to help therapists employ safety planning and promote emotional regulation among teens who are depressed, experiencing suicidal thoughts, etc. So the app lets folks do things like rate their distress level, record and access personalized reasons for living, photos, etc., contact important people. It lets them access activities to help with the stress, emergency strategies, but it does include clinicians in the app. Clinicians are using this as they work with somebody, and they're working with folks to help them with the safety planning process. But it does that kind of last goal. Well, it does a couple of the goals of the whys that I just mentioned, including just making the whole thing a lot easier, the whole process a lot easier. Really quick, we thought a lot about good design, which we're going to talk about in a bit. We thought about an app. We built an app that could work on both iOS and Android. We'll talk a little bit about what you might think about there in a bit. And we really worked with our client as the budget evolved. So of course, a big app like this is going to have a lot of iterations as it gets used by people and they give more feedback, and there's a bigger user base. So you need a more streamlined sort of portal and system that the whole thing works with. So we did a lot of work to update this as the years have gone by. And finally, I mentioned the grant mechanism. The IP of this is all owned by the University of Pittsburgh. I said 6 years in the making here. It's probably been about 7 years. We've been maintaining it for quite a while. But this is a really great example of a lot of the different things that I mentioned before. On the other hand, this is an example that has some interesting twists. So this is a project that we did with researchers at Yale, and it's an e-cigarette cessation study. And you see on the left, there's a web-based, tablet-based application that people can use. This thing includes a special wearable that can detect when you're smoking, or one of the variations of this project. I'm sorry, I think this project didn't necessarily use that. But this project, which you see on the right, rewarded people for not using e-cigarettes. And the way they were going to do this pre-COVID was that they were going to have people come into the lab once a day or once a week, I forget the frequency, and they were going to do a swab, a saliva swab, to figure out if they had been using e-cigarettes or not. Well, this project occurred during COVID, or it got funded after COVID started, so they could no longer do that. So we actually ended up, kind of rescuing the project. It wasn't our idea, it was the researchers' idea, but they ended up coming to us to help them rescue this project by building a really innovative online way to upload a video of you swabbing your mouth that's got a timestamp that lets them evaluate if you did the right thing or not, with respect to not smoking. Let's see. Okay. All right. So those are just a couple of quick examples just to give you kind of a feel for whys that might be interesting. So 3 big chunks of work that you will think about as you work. Planning, building, and then you've got to launch and maintain the project. So I think that you will spend equal amounts of your brain on each of these things, but I made the plan and the launch maintain lines a little fatter to sort of emphasize how important they are, because sometimes they are underemphasized. And we'll go through each of these things and talk in detail about them. So let's start with planning. I think planning is the keystone of every great project. Bad planning causes a lot of problems. So, think about this rule of thumb. It's not perfectly exactly accurate, but I really think it's a great way to think about planning. Fixing a mistake gets an order of magnitude more expensive or harder in each stage of a project. So think about an example where you've been talking through a project and you have a text document, a Google Doc or a Word doc, where you've written down the requirements of how it's going to work. Well, making an update to that is pretty trivial. Well, now you've got a visual sketch, that a good UI developer like Marina created, and you've spent a lot of time building that, and you want to change something. Okay, it's not the end of the world, but it's going to take a lot more time than changing some text. And then finally, let's just skip ahead to the very end. You've got a project, you've finished this app, you've distributed it to 100 study participants, and you realize there's something you really need to change. Now, that cost of update is going to far exceed the cost of any of those earlier updates. So really planning and really kind of stress testing your ideas and thinking through all the ins and outs early will really, really save a lot of time and effort. So it's probably true for everything, but I think it's not quite as obvious sometimes with software that feels easier to change than it is, because there are a lot of complexities that can go with changing it. So a lot goes into a web or a mobile app or a project, a research project technology. And of course, the more you plan, the better and the cheaper and the faster and the more fun and the more successful the whole project will be. So I take full responsibility for the ridiculous icon choices here. I don't know about why a sweet potato goes with functionality, but these are ingredients, and these are all the important planning ingredients of your project. And we'll talk about a few of them, and we usually work with our clients to think through all of them and more when we start a project. But this is something you can definitely do for yourself. So let's just talk through some of the ones that I think are pretty important. First off, IP. IP is pretty easy. Thinking through it is pretty easy when you do it early, but it is definitely something that gets harder the longer you wait. So we always recommend that folks think through this aspect of their project early. So you're going to build something valuable. It's important to think if you're ever going to see it be licensed. All universities have invention disclosure agreements. I think it's important that folks kind of note the timeline for when they came up with a cool idea so that they can be part of that, they can be protected. And then I think clear agreement between collaborators is maybe easy when it's colleagues at the same school. And I think maybe it's easy when you have a vendor that your school hires, somebody like us, the purchasing department's going to make they're going to make sure in the agreement that it's clear that that vendor doesn't have, ownership of the IP. It may get a little bit harder when you work with external partners, maybe another university, or maybe if you work with somebody like us who's a commercial collaborator, that, then it's really important to think through how you're going to work on this together. And if you can come up with some agreements, however informal or formal makes sense, so that nobody has any misunderstandings as the project goes on. So, I'm not an attorney. IP is confusing and mysterious sometimes to me, but I just wanted to mention, think about it early. I think it's very important. I think another interesting and critical thing is you're going to find somebody that's going to help you build your project. So a good partner is critical. Maybe this partner is somebody within your university. Maybe it's somebody you hire, maybe it's a collaborator that you're working with, but these things I think are all important to think about. Find somebody who's maybe done something like this before, has finished a project, a similar project before with good results. That's important, and it's easy to feel like doing one thing that's not super related, but it's just sort of software kind of translates into another. For example, if you're good at building websites, building an app is very different than building a website. If you're good at building an app that collects form data, building one that collects passive sensor data is very different than that, and so on. So there are lots of different things that you can do. I think experience with finding a partner who knows how to do research projects in particular is nice. It's not critical, but it really helps if they understand, if you're going to hire somebody, for example, if they understand university contracting processes and how IP should work and how they should interact so that they make your life easier. So another nice to have. Here's a big one. Make sure they understand how to scale up. This is a really common thing where it's really easy sometimes to build something that works for 3 or 4 test users, but it doesn't work for 100 participants in a final study. So think about, how you're going to do that and make sure the person who's helping you build it kind of gets that scaling thing. And, I think really critical, my most important rule when we work with folks is just find somebody that you trust and you enjoy working with, and you have a good rapport with, because typically these projects can be really long. I mean, oftentimes we work with folks from helping them budget for their grant proposal, helping them rebudget for a resubmission, waiting, building the thing. It can be years, before the thing's actually built. So you really have to find somebody who's a collaborator, not just a vendor that maybe you don't really like. So find a good team that you enjoy. Make sure they've got the background, whoever it is, whether it's internal or external. A lot of different working relationships that I think are useful to think about. You might collaborate with your colleagues on the development of technology. You might hire folks directly. You might get professional developers, folks like us. You might work with freelancers. So, or I'll talk a little bit about this hybrid partner idea. So, colleagues are great because you know them, you already like them, they already passed the I like them test. I think that hiring directly is great if you have a really specific skill that you need and you know exactly how to manage that skill. I don't think it's so great when you try to hire one person that should be a web app developer and a designer and a database developer, and the person is going to have, it's easy to try to find one person that can do all those things, but it doesn't usually, even within our own company, some of us are really good at one element of a project and others are good at another. So, really I think only hire directly when there's a specific skill that's necessary. Professional developers like us are great. They can be more expensive, but if you find somebody you really trust and they're really good, they might actually be less expensive because they avoid some pitfalls. But you've got to, maybe use the rules that we thought about on the last slide. Freelancers are students. We've worked on a lot of projects where we've helped undo some things that a student has done. There's some issues with both in terms of continuity. And again, that kind of comes back to one person who maybe doesn't have a lot of the attributes we talked about on the last slide. I think students can be incorporated and should be incorporated on projects, but I think putting them in charge of a big development effort is could be asking for trouble. And then, hybrid partners, sometimes we work, as I mentioned, as a funding partner with our university partners. So we might be the lead in submitting a small business innovation and research grant. So then, you've got this, in our case, a software company that is also funding the work. It's just a different way to think about it. But if you've got a project that makes sense that you want to commercialize, that could be a nice way to not pay somebody, maybe in fact have them pay you to do the work and do a lot of the work getting the funding to do that. So think about these things in terms of these 5 variables. What's the cost going to be? What's the relationship? What's the experience that comes in the relationship? What's the continuity look like? Is the person going to be gone in a semester because they're a student? What's the versatility? How can they do everything that's required of that project? And then again, super critical in my book, personality. Make sure you like working with whoever it is. I think that's important. All right, so quick little jump to a planning topic that I think is an interesting one. Do you make this thing a web application that you can use on your browser, on your computer, but which adjusts well to the size of a screen on the phone? Or do you build real mobile app, a native mobile app that's going to show up in the app stores and so on. So I think this the distinction here, the thing that makes sense is a web application, the one on the left, is often going to be less expensive to build. However, a mobile application, that has all the access it needs to all the functions of your phone or the watch that it's being built on, is going to have a lot more capability to do things like receive notifications or measure accelerometer data or measure screen time. So you've just got a lot more access to the guts of a phone or a watch or whatever when you build a native mobile app. However, the downside is it's a lot more expensive. We think 3 to 5 times more expensive to build native mobile app. Then you've got to think about app store deployments. You've got to get the thing deployed on the Android app store, get it deployed on the iOS app store, and so on. So really think about that. Think about budget, what you need the app to do, and then really finally, what's your audience prefer? Sometimes people like an app, and it makes it a lot easier to do some things. So it's a tough decision. I think it's easy to say, let's just build an app, but sometimes it makes sense to do something less expensive initially, which is a responsive web app that can run on a phone nicely. All right, so here's a cool example. This is a project that we just wrapped up last year. This was a fast track SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research grant that we did with an awesome researcher here at the University of Pittsburgh, Anna Radovic, who had this great idea for tracking mood of adolescents. We worked with another researcher at UVA, Afsana Doryab, to try to determine if the mood of a mildly depressed adolescent could be monitored by the things that they use their phone for. So can we tell if a mildly depressed, 16-year-old or 17-year-old is getting more depressed based on their activity levels, their location, like how often they leave their house, by their screen usage, things like that. So this is what we collected with this app called Mood Ring. And it was a really fun project to work on. So this was an example of using the phone, the mobile app route, the native mobile app route that I mentioned on the last slide, because we had to do a lot of stuff that required the usage of the phone. So as I mentioned, fast track SBIR, but we had to do this passive sensing piece that we could not have done if this was a web app. So we had to build it on a phone. And we actually used the framework called Aware that does a lot of the work. And we built a companion app that went with it that showed the results of that passive sensor data. We had to do a lot of work on design because we wanted to attract and engage an audience of adolescents for 6 months. These are picky users who know when an app stinks, so we had to make it really nice. And I think we did that. And Marina had a lot to do with that in the building of it. And we did release this as both iOS and Android, so we could get the maximum kind of coverage of folks who are using these things. Okay, next topic is that of the data portal. So almost every project that we build comes with or needs a place on the web where you can store and interact with things like participant data, where you can look at participant data. So, many studies have a REDCap or a Qualtrics database where they collect assessment data from participants in the study. But along with that, we typically build some sort of data portal where you can see how people are interacting with your app or set up new users for the app. Really important, monitor data integrity. Like if you're collecting data, the worst thing in the world is to know the collection didn't work after you're done with the project. So this has been really important. So this is just an important thing to think about. And I think it's easy to think about a spectrum of what these data portals can do. So really easy, simple data portal might just manage participants, add a participant, mark when they're done with the study, let you download data. More complex, you might be able to manage content that's going to show up in the app using this portal. So if you've got, say, a bunch of mood builder exercises for a behavioral health intervention, the portal would be the place where you and your research team can add a new mood builder that's just going to show up on the app for everybody who's using it, rather than like adding it directly to the app. That requires a programmer, that requires an update on the App Store. It requires everybody downloading a new app. So there's some really nice time-saving stuff you can do. A portal might sync up with your other study data collection tools like REDCap and Qualtrics. We often build portals that will grab participant information from REDCap once a participant has been randomized, and then make that participant available, in the portal for, pairing with a wearable or whatever. So that's a nice thing. And then, a really sophisticated portal can kind of coordinate between a whole bunch of apps and touch points. So I'll give you an example of that. I mentioned the Bright app earlier. We recently finished, I guess we finished a couple of years ago now. It wasn't that recent, but we've been maintaining this giant portal called iChart. And iChart lets you, it coordinates between the app that I told you about. There are other tools that were built by the same center that did screening early in the process, and then eventually sent interactive kind of text messages later in the process. So we built a portal to kind of coordinate this whole big complicated process. So there's a lot you can do with this, and it's a great way to sort of get to a point with maybe individual tools where things are really kind of hard to manage, and then you can sort of automate a lot of the work using a good portal if that makes sense for the project. All right, I won't go through this, but there are a lot of rules with apps that interact with folks. I think most researchers will be subject to the bottom left hand here, the common rule, and I think you're all very familiar with that. But it's always great to just think through this stuff. Is there any sort of FDA approval that needs to happen if the app is commercialized? All these things are great things to think about, and there are lots of resources online, but just do think about them. I like this quote. I don't know who Antoine is who said it, but I found it on the internet. Goal without a plan is just a wish. So I think the point here is writing a nice requirements document, even if it's a simple one, really helps align everybody on what's going to be built before it gets built, which is a good idea, because you don't want to build something and then fix it later. So it's important to think about who's going to use this thing that you're building. What's each role going to need? What do they want? What would researchers like to see? And if you're going to have doctors look at this thing, what do they need, et cetera. It's nice eventually to come up with screens of whatever you're building so that there's a visual of what it's going to look like a little later in the planning process. Think about what kind of content, not just what kind of content you're going to need, but who's going to write it, who's going to create it, how are they going to get it into the app. Lots of little details of the functionality. I think thinking through every screen really helps think through that. And then finally, something a good partner will help you with is thinking through the technical architecture. How are we going to build this so that it can scale properly and not break, et cetera. And then, of course, timeline, budget. How long is it going to take? One thing I didn't put on here that I think is important is also like risk mitigation. We're working on a really cool project now that collects accelerometer data and IMU data, accelerometer and gyroscope, and a bunch of other stuff from a wearable. And we, one of the big risks is can we do it without the watch battery running out? How much data can we send before these little watches will run out? Will the operating system allow us to do these things before it stops execution of the task because it's trying to maintain battery life. So it's really nice to make a list of all your greatest fears and think about how you can address those or avoid problems in the first place. All right, so detailed planning. How detailed? Not no detail at all, and you'll find yourself with a lot of surprises that probably won't be pleasant ones because it's really easy to miscommunicate. Too much detail where you specify every single interaction of a complicated app can be difficult to maintain. Usually it feels like there's a kind of a Goldilocks zone where you get enough detail where everybody really understands what's getting built, and there aren't any big questions where interpretations can cause the outcome to be wildly different. Another planning concept is this idea of a minimum viable product. And I think the foundation of this is that it's really unusual that the perfect app that we have in our minds is going to be cheaper than our budget, and it's going to be done faster than our budget. It's really unusual. We always want something that is going to be a little or a lot more than the budget that we have. So the idea here is what's the most basic version of this thing? What's it going to cost that's going to make your study successful? And then, how can we build something that's going to be a foundation for future work? So think about you have a K award and you're building something, but you're going to go back later, and once you have some initial data, preliminary data, you're going to go get an R21 and eventually an R1. You're going to keep building on this thing. So what can you build that's not going to be throwaway, but is going to get done what you need to get done? So anyway, your budget is going to set these boundaries, but just make sure you think about like, what's the minimum that I need? Because it's always going to be a useful approach. An example of that, I keep referring to all the cool work that Marina's worked on, but this is one that she's worked on too. But this is a really cool mobile app. It's made it was built to make practicing new parenting skills at home fun and easy, while letting the researchers track user engagement and progress. So this app was really, I think this app was built initially with a researcher's Early Researcher Award. So we really had to be judicious with how much money we spent. So, we really thought about the MVP functionality, and I think it was only released for, I forget if it was Android or iOS, one of the two mobile app platforms. Let's see, I'll just real quick. Yeah, the design had to be good, had to engage folks, so there was some good humor. Yeah, it was Android only initially. We had to track data, but we did trim a lot of features to make it fit into this initial budget, like push notifications and iOS development. But we're actually right now working on adding an iOS version, and I'm sure this is going to be a successful project that keeps getting built onto later and later. But we thought about, I guess the point is we thought about like a nice MVP that really worked well for the project, but set our awesome friend Joanna up for work in the future. Another interesting example is projects that sort of evolve over time. This project is a translation of the Bright app that first was translated into Hebrew and then was translated into Arabic. Multiple language support is smart to plan. The first language is always the hardest. These two right to left languages are even harder, but it gets easier the longer, the next languages that you add in. So this is just another example of how you start with an MVP and then you say, oh, it would be great to turn this thing into a multilingual app, So you can plan a little bit for these things so that it's easier to do something like making it multilingual in the beginning, but you don't have to do everything all at once. And that'll save you a lot of budget and headache. So next planning topic, design is critical. User experience. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but this is an important thing to think about. Getting somebody that you can work with that's really going to help you think about how to build something that the people you're going to use it with will use it. One of the biggest problems we have with any study is engagement, especially if it's like a behavioral health intervention. It's really a challenge to get people to continue using an app. That's something that we all know. So I just would say, I won't spend a lot of time here, that thinking through this is critical. I will kind of walk through some of the steps along the way. So just like it's a lot easier to change a text document with requirements, it's also pretty easy to change kind of a not so beautiful low fidelity wireframe where, it's almost a doodle. It's the back of the napkin sketch that just shows everybody, these are the screens that this app's going to have, and this is the way the buttons are going to be laid out and what we're going to show. Easy to change. Nobody's going to be super precious about how it looks, but eventually, once this is right, it leads to a really beautiful high fidelity version of the mock-up that everybody can look at. And in a second, I'll show you, can click through. And then when everybody likes this, like, oh yeah, I like the colors, I like the way the style is, then you build, your designer, and if it's a big project, builds out everything, a style guide, screens in the project, the way the graphs are going to look like. This is what our design team created, obviously really zoomed out for a project I told you about earlier called Mood Ring. But you end up building something that lets everybody see exactly how it's going to work, and then lets the people who are going to build it know exactly what they're building. I won't spend a lot of time, but like one of the cool things that you can do, I think, let's see if this comes through. I'm not really sure if this video is coming through or not. I think it is, but this is an interactive design. It looks like an app, but it's really built with a tool that lets folks click around, scroll around, but it's not a real app. It's not responding to data in such a way that it makes, that it works like a real app. So that's a really cool final step to make sure, that your stakeholders are getting what they want, but also in the case where you're doing focus groups with folks, for example, before you build something, this lets them click around on something that feels like an app before you actually build that app. All right, let's see if I can. All right. Let's see. Okay, so that was a lot. That was all the planning. But like I told you, I wanted to spend more time on planning and a little bit less time on building. So I'm gonna I promise only to give you one slide of nuts and bolts building stuff that I think is important. These are things that I think are really important that your developer, whoever it is doing. And these are things we could give you a lot more detail about if you're interested. But make sure whoever you're working with has a nice process in place to control their code so you can easily revert back to old code. Make sure that they have some way to review code as changes are made, particularly once an app is getting used. These are really important, really basic, but really important things. Make sure that they have a good testing framework, plan quality assurance. How are you going to all test the app once it's done? That's going to be a team effort usually, where you, the consumer, the client of the app, is going to help with that to make sure it really does what you want. And then think about, a task management system. Make sure that there's a way where you get some sort of transparency to see what folks are working on as the project is going on, so that you're not just kind of like in a black hole for 3 months while a project is being built, but that you really know what's happening along the way. So we usually recommend, at least weekly meetings with the team, with the development team, once you're in it, so you can see how things are going along the way, and really kind of adjust before things go off track, or, because there's always going to be maybe some divergence between development occasionally and what you actually want. So that's it. I know that building the app is the thing that could take the most amount of time. Well, maybe not. Launching and maintaining it is probably going to take, maintaining is going to be longer time-wise than building. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Feel free to give us a shout if you have any specific building concerns. But my thought is most folks are going to be more interested in like how to plan this and how to think through the whole thing than, want to learn all the nuts and bolts of building. So let's move on to the last stage. This thing's good. You've QA'd it. Your app's beautiful. It works. Now you need to launch it. So um, lots of things to think about. Too much to cover here. This is all from the white paper. Feel free to give us a shout about any of this. But if it's a mobile app, are you ready to deploy it to the App Store or stores? That's a process in and of itself. The App Store, Apple in particular, is fickle. They'll reject your app for a lot of reasons. So make sure you don't just do this the day before you need to make your study, turn the switch on for your study. Think about the software, the consent process. Can you use the software to help with that? Is your onboarding system all thought out? Like who's going to help people set the app up? Where is that going to fit into your process? I think this third bullet is really important. I mentioned it earlier. How do you know if your app has a problem for a particular user? You've got like the example of Mood Ring that I gave earlier, somebody using this app for 6 months. How do you know if their data collection thing, mechanism has broken 2 months into the study and you're going to lose all that data? Big part of that project and a lot of these projects is a really rigorous data integrity portion of the portal so that you know these things. And then, of course, how are you going to handle a lot of data coming in? You've tested the app with 2 users, and now you've got 100 people that are going to send you 6 months of data each. Is your system ready for that? It's an important test to do. All right. Okay. Keep calm and carry on, and also maintain your app. So this is important. Once you've launched this app, you've got to think about what's going to happen next. So you've deployed it. Hopefully you're planning for as many surprises as you can think of, as participants really do push an app in ways that you've never thought of. That's kind of just the way it is. So think about a post-deployment plan and budget so that you have a couple of months of somebody on hand to make updates as needed so that the app gets fixed if there's a problem or if there's something you didn't even think about is resolved. The rest of your study, hopefully support's going to be pretty mellow, but one thing that you have to think about is there may be minor feature updates, there may be bugs, there may be security updates. And almost always over the course of a year, there will be important security updates to the libraries upon which your app is built. So think about that. Make sure that you've budgeted maintenance into a project. Lots of things can also happen, like a new iPhone can get released and it totally screws up the user interface of your app in ways that you could never have anticipated because you don't know what Apple's going to build next or what Android's going to build next. So just think about maintenance. You'll definitely need it. It won't be as intense as right after deploying. And then finally, have a plan for wind down. What's going to happen at the end of your study? How are you going to archive data? Are you going to let people continue using the app? If so, do you have a plan for that? Who's going to pay for the hosting, etc.? All right. And finally, quick summary. Excellent planning, important, the foundational bedrock of an app. Changes cost more and more and more the further you get. So plan as much as you can early. Great planning, great communication are going to pull most of your changes early into the app, reducing what can be really unpleasant surprises late in the app. So don't skimp on that early planning. It's going to help you a lot. MVP, minimum viable product, is a critical thing that you can, sort of a critical guiding point to help you think about streamlining everything. And then, find a partner, whoever's going to build this for you or with you. Make sure you like them, talk to them a lot. And then, don't forget to budget for maintenance. And that is it. We'll send you some info after this, like Marina said, including a recording. And we'll also send you a link to a calendar link in case anybody wants to get together and brainstorm about anything once we're done.
Yeah.
And with that, Q&A, any questions?
Yes, nice work diving into the details and offering a nice little summary there, Sam. We do have some questions. Let's start with this first one here. What can you offer a researcher who wants an app but is not quite sure yet at the development phase because they don't know exactly what they want or need because funding isn't available yet?
Yeah, that's a situation that we find ourselves in quite a bit with folks, and that's fine. Almost every person needs to start with how much might this cost so I can get funding, or what's feasible so I can figure out how much what's feasible might cost so I can get funding. So we do a couple of things. First is we spend quite a bit of time with people that come to us just brainstorming. We'll grab a few people from the team. We'll really think through what is necessary, what the requirements are from for the app, and help people think through like what it might change to. Like if there's a problem, if there's something really expensive, we help brainstorm a bit on that, and then we'll go through a budgeting process for budgeting for proposal. So, whether it's a K award or an R1 or whatever stage you're at, we'll help you do that. And then if you need a little bit more than that, if you want to sketch out some screens or sketch out an architecture diagram, we do offer. So that's what I just described as free, and we just consider it part of our customer, introduction process. But we do offer discovery packages where we can negotiate kind of like how much you want us to help, and we can help you build something that you can actually maybe put into a proposal. So I think there's a great range of things we can do there.
Nice. And I think you you probably already addressed this, but I like this question. Can a research client bring a raw idea to your team for consideration for an SBIR or STTR that you would apply for on their behalf?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, definitely. We usually do work like that as a partner with folks that we've worked with before, but we certainly have done it with people that we've just met or not worked on a project before with. And really, we would just want to consider that together because SBIR and STTR applications are at least just as hard as writing a big proposal for the kind of NIH grants maybe that you're already familiar with. But they also come with the obligation that we want to commercialize the product. So we'd have to do a little bit of research on our end to make sure it's something commercializable, figure out with you how you want to do that and how you'd want to be involved, and then sit down together and decide if it makes sense. So we love that when people come to us with those ideas. It's not always a fit, but we'll go through a process and figure out together if that's the case or not.
So I think you just kind of went over this, but what happens to an app once a research project comes to an end? Can apps be repurposed?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For sure, like I mentioned on the MVP idea, hopefully they can be repurposed for your next study, and as you grow the idea and get preliminary data. So I think that's one way, is to think about your increasing kind of science needs as you go. Hopefully you can use that app over again, and it's built in such a way that you can use it over again. But then another way, in the case of these commercialization grants, is typically you're building something that you hope you can sell or include as part of a product, and get out into the world that way. So yeah, absolutely. We're thinking right now on a couple of projects about whether or not we'll give the technology that we're having folks use to the participants, just so they'll have it. So if you do that, you have to think about how you're going to pay for the hosting and all that kind of stuff. But I think there are a lot of different ways you can use it, reuse it, and keep it out there and alive.
Great. I just want to remind everyone that you can access the white paper that we wrote on this topic from on our website, and I have the link shared in the chat. And when we do end this webinar, there'll be a really quick survey that'll pop up if you would mind taking a minute to fill that out. And yes, please, if you have any more questions, we have just a minute or two left, and go ahead and enter them into the Q&A. But here's a good one that how does or does your team ever project manage a build using university students as developers? Is this a good way to save money?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned before, it doesn't make sense usually to have a student kind of lead the whole development effort, but we have definitely worked with smart, students that have built a particular part of an app, whether it's a undergrad or graduate student assistant of some sort. So it definitely makes sense to fit folks in, but just as long as there's some guidance, students typically don't have the experience of how to make a rubber meets the road app survive in the real world. So somebody helping them with that makes them super productive. So definitely it can work.
And let's see. So let's do one last question. Um, what does maintenance involve? Can you elaborate on who is responsible for catching the bugs, or catching bugs, and who gets notified of security updates?
Yeah. Well, we are typically, when we're doing maintenance or your developers doing maintenance, we're, typically on the hook for making sure that security updates are made in a timely fashion. So if there's, updates to the libraries that are used to build the app, whoever's doing the maintenance, whoever's contracted to do it, better be making those updates. And then usually in terms of day-to-day bugs, the research team is kind of the first line of support because usually we can make a nice kind of a playbook of if somebody has this problem, here's how to respond to it. But then once that doesn't work, those problems are escalated to the developer who's doing the maintenance, and they should be able to take care of it. So, hopefully you catch most bugs, the vast majority before a product's launch, but it's not realistic to think that you'll catch 100% of them. So there needs to be a mechanism after the product's out there to catch and deal with bugs. And that's what the maintenance should be for. And the entity that's doing it should be on the hook for that.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Sam, and for everybody for joining today. I will be sending out this recording in an email tomorrow. So thank you all for joining, and see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you, Marina. Bye.